Hey there! Are you a crime scene investigator, law enforcement officer, or forensic scientist looking for a Facebook community that understands you? Check out Taction USA's forensic product groups. You'll find blogs, articles, information, and community. For those of us in the investigative field, there are not many lines of support out there, but Taction USA is a company that was founded by law enforcement for law enforcement. Subscribe today to get access to exclusive content. Just look for Taction USA in Facebook groups. Welcome to Crossing the Tape, your favorite true crime podcast. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Hillary, and I'm joined by my lovely husband,
Brendan.
And today we're going to give you an episode about Stockholm Syndrome, which it's a dark, deep place to go, but the story is interesting. So if you would, please sign the crime scene log and join us for Colleen and the Company.
One of psychology's many curiosities, Stockholm Syndrome is the condition in which a hostage develops a sympathetic bond with their kidnapper. The term originates from the 1973 Kreditbanken bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden.
Very good.
Thank you. The hostage-taker, Jan Olsson, had absconded from a prison furlough and attempted to rob a bank, taking 4 employees hostage. As police moved in, Jan threatened to kill the hostages and retreated into the bank vault with them, demanding guns, bulletproof vests, money, and a fast getaway vehicle. Over the course of the 5-day crisis, Olsson never harmed the hostages despite his threats to do so if the police attempted to use tear gas or other means to incapacitate him. The hostages became concerned that police would end up escalating the situation rather than negotiating for their release. Media coverage skewed this to the point that the public believed the hostages had sided with Olsson and wouldn't cooperate with police, when in reality they just believed that any police intervention would result in their own deaths. Regardless, the phrase Stockholm Syndrome has been used to describe any situation in which kidnapping victims are reluctant to part with their captor for a variety of reasons. While the Stockholm hostages feigned sympathy out of self-preservation, other kidnapped victims have become far more attached to their captors even when given the opportunity to escape. And that brings us to May of 1977, when Colleen Stan was walking from Eugene, Oregon, to a friend's house in Northern California to attend a birthday party. Given this journey could take several days on foot, Colleen decided to engage in a bit of hitchhiking.
That's what I was just thinking.
That's a long...
How far is that? She's just going to take a jaunt.
I kind of, roughly estimating just from city to city, like 30 hours on foot.
Yikes.
Or something like that, or more. But, yeah. So you gotta hitchhike.
That shouldn't have been attempted at all.
No. Well, no. She would have been much better off staying home.
Mm-hmm.
She accepted rides from people who seemed safe, but declined a ride from anyone who gave her a bad feeling, such as a van full of young men that a lone 20-year-old woman didn't need to be surrounded by, with no control over her destination. Then when a blue van approached with a young husband and wife riding up front and their 8-month-old daughter in the back, Colleen had no reason to believe these were anything other than polite, decent people concerned for a young woman walking along the highway. Colleen accepted their kindness, which turned out to be the gravest mistake of her life. Once she was inside the vehicle, the driver, Cameron Hooker, told Colleen he and his wife Janice wanted to do a bit of sightseeing as he pulled onto a side road. As soon as the car came to a stop, Cameron Hooker pulled a knife and made his intentions clear. Colleen was going to ride with he and Janice back to their home in Red Bluff, California, whether she wanted to or not. And to make things worse, Cameron was well prepared to take a woman captive on this journey. He had specially crafted a heavy wooden box, which he forced over her head and latched tightly so that she couldn't remove it. The box was completely dark and it had been soundproofed, making it impossible for her to hear what the hookers were saying and making it pointless for her to scream for help.
Yikes.
Yeah, well,
talk about premeditated.
Yes. Yeah, we find that Cameron is a bit of a craftsman. He likes building many of his own devices. Colleen Stan was tied up and driven to the hooker's residence, where she was hung by her arms from the rafters in the basement. As if the mental anguish of the kidnapping wasn't enough, Colleen was subjected to physical abuse, including brutal whipping at the hands of Cameron. After hanging from the rafters for a prolonged period, Colleen was untied and forced into a larger box, which was not long enough for her to lie down in, forcing her to remain in a seated position overnight.
Ugh.
The following day, she was tied to a homemade rack with her hands and feet chained to the corners. For over a week, she was tied to the rack during the day and forced into the box at night. Repeatedly sexually assaulted and beaten, and frequently blindfolded and gagged. Over the next 5 months, Colleen spent less time tied to the rack, and yes, you heard 5 months correctly.
Oof.
And she was instead suspended from the rafters during the day, while she was subjected to various forms of torture, including essentially waterboarding and electrical shocks. In October of 1977, Colleen was moved to another box designed to fit under the basement stairs. And when she was not inside that box or being abused, she was forced to do housework, making her Cameron Hooker's slave in every sense of the word. We'll bring you more of Colleen Stan's harrowing story after this message from the National Investigative Training Academy.
If you are looking for a career change or to expand your knowledge in an already established one, look no further than the National Investigative Training Academy. The National Investigative Training Academy, or NITA, N-I-T-A, has well over 100 courses with 70 professional development ones alone. NITA is constantly adding to their course catalog, and courses are focused on private investigation and security fields. Whether you would like to become a private investigator or you need continuing education for your investigative or security career, the National Investigative Training Academy is for you. All courses offered are 100% online and do at your own pace. Once completed, you will receive a certificate in that course. Sign up today at investigativeacademy.com. Make sure when you sign up for your courses, you mention we sent you there. We encourage you to get the best investigative and security training possible today. When you sign up, mention our brand ambassador code, BA2367. That's BA2367, and you can find those courses at investigativeacademy.com. Look for links in our show notes as well.
During Colleen's captivity, Cameron and Janice Hooker intimidated her by spinning a tale about an unnamed company that trafficked sex slaves and tracked down and punishes any that try to escape. They also went as far as telling her that her family would suffer at the hands of the company if she so much as attempted to get away. Colleen was forced to sign a contract giving Cameron ownership of her soul, otherwise she would have to deal with the company. The contract was of course not legally binding, but after the mental and physical trauma she had already suffered, Colleen was beginning to believe that her only choice was to stay with the Hookers or be turned over to the company for even worse abuse and put her family at risk.
How awful, though, to beat someone down that much, and that's with the purpose of full control.
Yes.
And just making them so broken they believe anything you tell them.
Mm-hmm. The way that she was subjected to all this was very carefully designed.
Oh, yeah. There's a layer for each event.
Break her down and get her to believe that this isn't a great life, but it's this or much, much worse. So that led to her kind of becoming reliant on these people who are holding her captive. Basically, she wouldn't be safe unless she was there with them.
Right.
So she might as well get comfortable. As far as Colleen was concerned, she was now bound to be Cameron Hooker's slave, and upholding her end of the contract was the only way to keep her family safe. Essentially, her only lifeline was the man who had spent months torturing her. This belief festered in Colleen Stan for the duration of her captivity, and she didn't dare break any of Cameron and Janice's rules. Her obedience after signing the contract granted her slightly more freedom, and she was treated with at least a tiny bit of dignity. She was allowed to come up to the main floor of the house, finally gaining a bit of reprieve from the basement. She was made to call the Hookers Sir and Ma'am, and bow and ask permission before doing anything. Eventually, the hookers moved to a new home without a basement in 1978. Colleen's new living quarters became a large box Cameron had built to use as a platform for he and Janice's waterbed. Colleen spent the entire day in the box, freed at night to cook and clean. Soon the hookers had a second child and Janice got a job. This was great news for Colleen because she was free to roam the house throughout the day while babysitting. She still didn't dare leave, however, because the company was always watching. As Colleen's restrictions eased little by little, the abuse did not. Initially, Janice Hooker only allowed Cameron to take a woman as a slave on the condition that he did not have actual intercourse with her. However, by 1979, this part of the arrangement faded away, and Cameron began raping Colleen several times a week. Colleen feigned affection for Cameron in the hopes he would treat her better, and this worked to a degree because in 1980, keep in mind she was abducted in 1977. So in 1980, she was allowed to make a few phone calls to her family members back in Oregon. Cameron monitored these conversations, and Colleen was careful not to allude to the truth of her disappearance. In exchange for the increased freedom, Cameron often tested her loyalty to ensure she wouldn't leave him. The most extreme example being a time when Cameron handed Colleen a gun, which she didn't know was empty. He ordered her to put the gun in her mouth and pull the trigger. Rather than turn the gun on him and try to fight her way out, she did as she was instructed.
Ugh. That was sick.
Yeah. The biggest taste of freedom Colleen got came in March of 1981, when Cameron granted her request to visit her parents. Of course, this was preceded by more threats of the company, and that Cameron had paid a $30,000 deposit to have her watched during the visit. Colleen reunited with her family for two one-day trips after she was dropped off by her so-called boyfriend, Cameron. She insisted that she was doing fine, however her family was concerned that she had joined a cult due to her unexplained absence.
Well, almost.
And appearance and, she'd been brainwashed just the same as
I was gonna
someone
say,
who had fallen
it's very similar.
Despite this, they did not push the issue out of fear that she would run away for good. Happy to see her back, the Stan family asked to snap a picture of Colleen with her boyfriend, resulting in a highly unsettling photo of the pair, smiling like any happy couple, with the true nature of their relationship completely unknown to her family.
Wow.
And you can find that photo very easily online. They both just look happy as can be, and nobody had any idea.
Wow.
Once back at the Hooker residence, Colleen was returned to her old routine of spending the day in the box for the rest of 1981, all the way to summer of 1984.
How awful.
Now, in 83, she was granted the opportunity to get a job outside the home and work as a motel maid, of course surrendering her wages to the hookers. So now they're just, in addition to the abuse and all the fun that Cameron's having, she's now a source of income for her.
Right.
Throughout the early 80s, Cameron Hooker's delight with his slave was wearing on his wife. He had made sure to use religion to guilt Janice into being subservient to him, forcing her to read aloud Bible passages regarding a wife's role in a marriage and being obedient to her husband. Despite being fearful of going to hell for violating the tenets of the Bible, Janice was struggling to continue with the slave arrangement, and it became unbearable when Cameron announced that Janice was his wife and Colleen was his slave wife, and as such he would engage in sex with each of them on alternating nights.
Ugh. But she didn't think that was going on before?
Right.
I mean, come on.
Well, that was her original part of the agreement was, sure, you can take a woman captive. I don't have an issue with that, as long as there's no sex. But she wasn't in any position to tell him no either, because she feared him, and she also feared going to hell.
I was thinking he probably brainwashed her just as much.
Yes.
She probably had Stockholm Syndrome in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Because why on earth would that be acceptable?
Right. Yeah.
Any of it.
He had probably been working on her mind for
years.
Many years before he even proposed the idea and, talked her into it. And then once he got his way, she knew that she couldn't tell him no anymore. In 1984, Colleen had begun using some of her time outside the box to attend church. Janice would drive Colleen to church and occasionally attend the services herself. In August of that year, Janice was seriously struggling with being one of 2 wives to a deranged slave master. She confided in the church pastor about life at the Hooker residence over the last 7 years. Unsurprisingly, the pastor advised Janice to take Colleen and get far away from Cameron and turn him into the police.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't quite feel she could do all of that. But that same day, her guilt overtook her, and she informed Colleen that the company was made up, and it was just a scare tactic to keep her in line. When they returned home that evening, neither woman let on that Colleen knew the truth, although the revelation had her head spinning.
Mm-hmm.
The last 7 years were a lie. She could have escaped at any time. She never needed to rely on Cameron for her safety. He was the only threat to her. So her whole reality was shaken.
I'm glad she had at least a moment of realization, though.
Yes. That it was all bogus.
Right.
And all the supposed freedom he was giving her,
mm-hmm.
letting her be outside the box and all that. All of that was an opportunity to escape.
Right.
If she had only known that this whole, these people are watching and if they take you, it's going to be worse. That was all nonsense. And she probably also realized, oh my God, I fell for that.
Yeah.
And I only fell for that because he had so severely traumatized me and brainwashed me. So it probably snapped her out of everything pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, August 10th, 1984, Cameron went to work none the wiser that his world was about to crumble. Janice and Colleen took the children and headed to Janice's parents' home. Colleen called her parents and managed to get a bus ride home. But before leaving, she called Cameron to let him know the game was over and that he would never see her again. Colleen returned to her parents and told them the truth of what had happened. But, at the urging of Janice Hooker, Colleen refused to report Cameron to the police.
Ugh.
So there's still
a
little
hold.
bit. Yeah, there's still something holding her back.
Mm-hmm.
Janice assured Colleen that she could reform Cameron and make him a proper Christian husband.
I don't think so.
7 years too late.
Yeah.
However, after months of trying, Janice couldn't get Cameron to give up his bondage and torture devices. Earlier on, he had also spent 2 years under cover of night making Colleen dig a hole that they lined with cinder blocks that was supposed to be like a chamber where he planned on keeping additional slaves.
Ugh.
That never came to fruition, thankfully, but this guy wasn't going to give up until he was actually stopped.
Right.
He was probably, if Colleen ever left, he was just going to convince Janice that he needed a new slave.
Mm-hmm.
And do the same thing to some other poor woman. He clearly still wanted to use those devices on someone. And unsure of what to do, Janice confided in the pastor once again. And the pastor, likely dumbstruck that Janice still had anything to do with this man after what she first told him, took it upon himself to contact police.
Good.
Pastors don't generally use foul language, but this guy probably thought, what the hell are you thinking? Cameron Hooker was in custody very soon after the investigation began, and his case went to trial in 1985. Janice Hooker and Colleen Stan were the main witnesses on behalf of the prosecution, and their accounts of the events surely are what sealed Cameron's fate. In fact, the only reason Janice wasn't also arrested is because she agreed to testify against Cameron, also as a victim of his brainwashing. So like he said, she
Yes.
She was obviously complicit in a lot of this,
but she was also coerced as well.
Right, quite heavily. And the scare tactic for her wasn't the company, it was that, look, the Bible says you do what I say because I'm the husband, so
right.
If you want to go to hell, well, be my guest.
Right.
But otherwise, I need to have a slave girl, and you're going to be part of it. And I don't think that's in the Bible.
No, it is not.
A psychologist who interviewed Colleen testified as an expert and explained that the way Cameron controlled every aspect of Colleen's reality by keeping her naked, in the dark, isolated, unable to eat, drink, or use the bathroom without permission, while abusing her in every way imaginable, plus convincing her she would meet an even worse fate if she tried to leave, created total dependency and crushed any resistance a person would show towards a captor.
Mm-hmm.
So the psychologist agreed that under normal circumstances,
it would be,
a person in this situation would be trying to flee or fight, do something, but the way that he went about this, it just wasn't going to happen.
Makes you wonder too what kind of past and upbringing he had.
Yeah, what was his life like before he met Janice?
What happened that he became this monster?
Well, he apparently had a big interest in masochism and BDSM type literature and things about, discipline and very sexual stuff, but to the far extreme of abuse rather than, just a fetish.
Yeah.
To that far end. And that kind of literature is what inspired him, how to make a person obedient to you.
And that's interesting that you bring up that point, because there's been a lot of serial killers in the past that, they'll sexually assault, and then the homicides they commit are considered sexual homicides.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it began by reading literature of that nature.
Right.
The really dark stuff that,
not an issue of Playboy, but something...
like something dark that...
about the psychological torment of another person for your own sexual gratification.
Or there's been a few that they were exposed to that kind of literature by a parent when they were very young.
Yes.
So not only did it probably become a fascination, it probably became normal in a sick, twisted way.
Yes. It became just another
acceptable
part of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Something that didn't bother them.
Right.
Even though it's, there's no concern for the person they're subjecting to this torture. Now, Cameron decided to testify on his own behalf, and he insisted that while he did kidnap Colleen and hold her captive, she consented to all of the sex acts that he was accused of. But again, this is also like there's statutory rape, where a person is considered too young to consent to something,
right?
With an of-age person, and someone who's in a position of authority, a teacher, a school, principal, whatever. This is probably similar to that, because he's in such a position of authority that one, he very seldom probably asked if she had any interest in that, and he just did what he wanted to do.
Right.
But if he ever did ask, I don't think she was in a position where she felt she could say
no, and she probably didn't, because it went along with everything else that he had gaslighted her about.
Right. You can't tell me no.
Right.
So if I'm going to ask you something, the answer is yes.
Right.
And if he's considering that, like, well, she consented to all of it.
Yes and no.
She may have said the words yes or okay, but
under the guise of an abusive relationship.
Yeah, otherwise you will die.
Right.
Oh, well, in that case.
Right.
Now, that defense didn't help him much, because the kidnapping, with use of a weapon, 6 counts of rape, and several other sex offenses, resulted in a 104-year sentence for Cameron Hooker.
Good.
It's amazing with all the... she estimated that he was raping her several times a week.
I know, they only
for
got
several years.
They only got 6 counts.
But yeah, it whittled down to. It's 104 years, so
it doesn't matter.
That's life
but
no matter what.
It also might have been, statute of limitations.
And the clearest
yes,
testimony. Look, if we can put together 10 counts that are very reliable and that she recollects.
And it's obviously rape.
Yeah, and each one gets him 5 to 10 years, then he's going away forever. They don't need to, 720 counts of rape that a jury's going to have to deliberate and go, number 289, she didn't really have a good story. So they probably simplified for that reason.
True.
He became eligible for parole in 2015, and his next parole hearing will be in August of this year. So, about 2 months from date of recording, where the 70-year-old will seek his release to a state hospital under some sort of elderly compassion release deal. So, in a couple months, he could be out of prison, not necessarily free to walk the earth, but 70 years old and no longer imprisoned. But we'll see how that one shakes out. Colleen Stan changed her name and continues to do her best to live a normal life, while Janice moved on from her marriage to work as a mental health professional. Oof. How about that?
Interesting.
I mean, good for her for making the change.
Right.
And, hey, if anyone understands psychological trauma, probably her.
Yeah, that's true.
So that is the story of Colleen Stan and her experience of Stockholm Syndrome because of the lies that were put before her. Even though this guy's basically the devil, standing before her, she felt, well, it's this or nothing, so naturally I have to choose this. And, would never go against him in any way. It was completely on his side until she learned that it was all a lie.
Bogus. And, it'd be interesting and sad all at the same time to realize, or to, I don't know, to find out maybe what her thoughts were in that moment that she realized it was all a facade.
I can't imagine how earth-shattering that would be.
Yeah.
And especially for it to come from Janice, too.
Yes.
To say, look, we have been lying to you.
Yeah. I know.
After 7 years, to find out.
Everything's been a lie.
Everything from day one, from signing over your soul in a contract to protect you from the company.
I know, which that fact alone to me appears on the outside like that would be...
That's ridiculous.
That's nonsense. But given her situation, given the mental state she was in from being so broken down, it makes sense that she thought it was legitimate. Yeah,
and that was only after 5 months.
Right.
Everything else continued for 6.5 more years. So, we hope that wasn't too dreadful, but we wanted to discuss something that's really seldom seen and not always understood.
Right.
Stockholm Syndrome. It's not always as simple as becoming an ally to your captor.
No, and I think often people think, well, they victim shame a little bit. The victim should have known better, but in that circumstance, they really didn't.
Right. And speaking of victim shaming, unfortunately, the subject of the next case we'll talk about, they had to deal with quite a bit of that from the media. But that'll be saved for next time. We do appreciate you joining us. Please sign the crime scene log on the way out.
Stay safe. Thank you for listening.
And so...